there is another very important phase of warfare. It has as its target not the body, but the mind of the enemy.
The target of psychological warfare is against the enemy's mind.
It is words and ideas.
The ammunition used by Psywar.
Its mission is to influence the thoughts of the enemy soldier, and at the same time
is expected and encouraged to study foreign languages and the social sciences such as history, economics, and sociology. He must have a broad and sympathetic understanding of all phases of human experience.
Gripping at my skin, the walls of night closing.
But the use of this force as an integral part of combat has now taken on new form.
As I wait to say my last goodbye.
These are the Psywar soldiers.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Sunday, August 4th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to get right into it today. I have a lot to talk about. Probably won't get to everything I have lined up, but we're going to try a little bit less than 2 hours today before I have another recording that's probably going to come out tomorrow. So just on that note, we're going to jump right in. A lot to talk about. Venezuela, Iran. The larger point across the board today, as you saw, is the idea of as we've talked about many times, fifth generation warfare and other facets or other names, irregular warfare. What's the other one I was recently just looking at? One of the things that the reason this was framed this way today, unconventional warfare, is around the current hype or fervor that we're all kind of feeling, and it's different than usual. And I think we've been watching the building of this kind of manipulation through technology and long before the social media the way it is today. We were seeing this kind of warfare using psychological operations, using populations against their government, starvation tactics, all mental and other types of non-kinetic type warfare is really what that talks about. There's different variations within it. I'm going to point to something from WikiLeaks that discussed specifically what, as he would call one of the most important things that was released in 2008, the U.S. Army Special Operations Forces unconventional warfare. The clip you saw opening was actually an advertisement put out by the Army, literally outlining, overviewing that exact reality. And yet it's all illegal. It's unquestionably illegal. And we'll talk about that. But the point is, this is something that is becoming uncomfortable here throughout the history of, like, let's just say the U.S. empire. This is stuff that most Americans don't feel that immediately affected by. This is stuff that, this is why almost by design. So we're supposed to think that everything is going well, and it's all the stuff that's way over there that we don't hear about, think about, feel about. Sadly, I think that's disgusting that it's been this way for so long that we are able to sort of box that out. But today we're seeing this pointed at ourselves more than ever. It always has been to some degree. And that's because of your government doing that. As Whitney coined the term, your body's the new battlefield, with the whole medical freedom, technocratic direction. But I think this is because of other countries, primarily of Israel, for a long time, having the United States as sort of its focus for a lot of manipulations. But I'm going to go over how this connects with all these discussions. We're going to talk about in two main parts, the Twitter overlap, the Israeli bot farm clear operation, that it's just one of the most obvious things we've seen in this conversation that is being facilitated, in my opinion, by Elon Musk, the digital regime change aspect of Elon Musk, and a couple of other facets, weaponized migration, and how all of this, I think, is brimming over. Well, let's knock my microphone over, boiling over the top. And I see it happening in very alarming ways that are immediately translating into suffering, death, murder, destabilization, in a lot of places around the world. And I genuinely do not think, I mean, if ever, but more than ever right now, that I don't think this is organic. And so we're going to talk about that to go through today. So let's jump right into it. Limited time. I'm going to start with a point from the medical freedom side of this, which is part of this conversation. As we should all know by now, one of the most obvious psychological operations, and really, whatever you think happened, that is still a correct statement. All of the lies around it, the propaganda, and also, if you're paying attention, the complete, absolute fabrication of damn near everything in that discussion. But that we're still seeing this play out, and this overlaps with all these countries we've discussed. So we're going to start with a point from Aaron Siri that I just wanted to make sure we're not missing this. It is really incredible to see all the things that we've broken down, and we as the honest independent media out there, long time ago. Now, this is from Aaron Siri sharing this. I basically just pointed out what he shared with the link so people can get this more reach, people can see it. It's all based on Aaron's amazing work. He says, thank you, Thomas Massey, for the opportunity to tell members of Congress how the CDC tried to hide that its premier COVID-19 vaccine safety system, the only created because they wanted to pull away from theirs. Obviously, I think it was clear that was blowing up in their face. That showed 7.7%. And I can promise you it's more than that. That's how these systems tend to work. It's a signal, and it's almost always more. 7.7% of its 10 million users needed medical care after these injections, an average of 2 to 3 times each. And yet they not only hid this from you, they tried to bury this. And the only reason it ever came out is because of efforts from people like Aaron Siri. They know they were killing people. Now, you have to ask yourself whether that was just covering up their malfeasance, or rather specifically their criminal activity, and the malfeasance being that point, or that this was the design. And if so, to what end? There's a lot of things to think about around this. Here's what he was saying.
Siri, I want to ask you, and if you go over a little bit, that's okay. What mechanisms did the government have to track vaccine side effects over time as these rolled out? And did they even pay attention to the data?
Well, prior to the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine, the primary system that was relied upon that is the joint FDA-CDC VAERS system. And then when the COVID vaccine was rolled out, they rolled out a new system, and we discussed that earlier, called vSafe. vSafe, unlike VAERS, doesn't just try to solicit adverse events from people who've been injured by the vaccine. It asked every American to sign up for this system on the day they got their shot and then fill out reports. 10 million Americans signed up for vSafe. There were check-the-box surveys every day for 7 days, and every day, once a week for 6 weeks, and 3 more times after that. And the CDC published about 40 studies using that data, the check-the-box data in vSafe for these 10 million Americans. The only real relevant data was, did you seek medical care, okay? But it only reported in those studies the first week of healthcare seeking behavior after the vaccine. We litigated for 2 years, and when we finally got that check-the-box data from the CDC, it showed exactly why the CDC didn't want to produce it to the public. It showed that 7.7% of the 10 million Americans who signed up for vSafe, and this was in the first 6 months after the vaccine was rolled out. These were the vaccine enthusiasts. These were not the folks mandating the vaccines. 7.7% reported need medical care after getting the vaccine, on average 2 to 3 times each, and over 70% of them was for emergency room, hospitalization, or urgent care.
I thank you. I think the gentleman from North Dakota.
So all serious adverse events. All serious adverse events. That, like, just quick math, and I think that's almost 800,000 people. And that's a signal. That's just so incredibly disgusting. And let's not forget, right? I mean, what he's highlighting is the buried system, the lies around this. I mean, this story goes back a long way. This is not just this injection, the fact that they've been hiding and sidestepping this from the very early parts of this, but there's also the other surveillance, right? Palantir, we already discussed this. Moncef Slawi, Operation Warp Speed, the open discussion that Whitney and I discussed, her great work on this, that they were tracking you whether or not you signed up for that system. pharmacovigilance. So not only do we have VAERS and VSafe all showing this, they have their own background system where they were watching all of this and they don't show any of this stuff. And we've already, with that, aside from that, we already know how this was seen. We can prove that they were aware of these things in 14 different angles and chose the whole time to keep it from your view. And then on top of that, then go as far as to tell you you need this for your safety, knowing that it was the opposite. I mean, how in the world we get away from how obvious that is? And then don't forget Palantir, that's Thiel, the whole PayPal mafia, JD Vance funding, Trump funding. It's all the same direction. It's all the partisan angles trying to get you to see it in a different light. Now, here is Chief Nerd pointing out another point we've been telling you from anybody paying attention from the beginning of this conversation. Despite being one of the most vaccinated states against COVID-19, the COVID rate in Massachusetts is now twice the national average. This is now, which is not in any way to say, oh my God, this is hurting people. Oh my God, we should be worried about this. Or if it's even there with PCR false positives. The point is to simply argue, if you believe that, and from within their narrative, that if this is supposed to be the most protected, well, clearly it never is, going back from the very beginning to right now. And on top of that, I also am worried about the way this is being presented because they're using wastewater trends. So it's normalizing the testing of your wastewater to tell you what's about to happen. This is the medical pre-crime overlap that we've been talking about, ringing that bell for a long time. We also have the new threat that keeps getting nudged a little bit further every day. Here's the Star, Daily Star. New pandemic could sweep UK this year. I love, those are the most ridiculous headlines. You could say that any day, all the time, forever. It could. New thing could happen later. Let's hype the scare now. And don't forget, health is more than influenza from the WHO, the document we've showed many times, where two people from the WHO, that document's now been scrubbed, I've brought it up a million times, says very clearly this is based on pandemics of fear, hyping things based on the unknown. And they've stressed that was a problem. And that's why these people all got pushed away and they've, given a new facelift. Same with the HHS. I've shown you documents in the past of both of them calling out the scam, the conflation of pneumonia and flu, the lie about the real cause, the scaremongering around the injections to force the need for. Now it just all drifts in the background, despite that coming from the very source telling you now that those things are fake news. But it says the UK Health Security Agency has declared a level 4 bird flu outbreak after the virus jumped from cows to humans. This whole narrative to me seems completely like the idea that I've gone over all this. I don't want to get into this to start. This was just an opening point that I wanted you to see. But just this entire setup, the way this has been going, does not line up with anything we've ever been told about the way these things typically work. I mean, what about all the other birds? What about, this is just the idea that this is jumping to other animals, other species, but then it doesn't go from there. It just kind of stops, or that we already claim there's human transmission, but then not human to human, which doesn't make any sense. On top of all the other things they're telling you. But then we're talking about PCR testing. We're talking about injections being rushed under EUA for the same. It's the same story. I'm not saying we're going to see this go the same way. It very well could, though. So make sure we're paying attention because it is lazy and dangerous. Oh, and in case you missed it, there's another hype. But whether or not this is a hype to worry you or a genuine concern they're using, it could just as easily be both, because either way, it's their fault. We're talking about more examples of super bug antibacterial resistant, I'm saying it all weird, antibiotic, resistant bacteria. And this is how long have we even on this show talked about this? For years, if not more. The idea that there's been very, very intelligent people out there going, if we keep overusing antibiotics, we're going to fall into this problem. Well, we won't be able to come back from. And everyone just ignores it. And all the people that are supposed to be the experts guiding our health policy don't stop doing it. And in fact, they do it even more. And then we do it with animals and we do it with everywhere. And what do you know? Look at that. Now we've got this internal hospital bacteria that's resistant to drugs that's seeming to be becoming a problem in 15 countries. It's almost like we could have seen this coming and stopped it, but didn't, It kills me, but they're hyping it nonetheless. Super bug detected in US and 15 other countries. So I do see them laying that groundwork. So keep an eye out for that. In the idea of the technocratic overlap, I didn't want you to miss these two things. Now, one part of what we keep talking about, just in regard to the two-party illusion, in regard to the direction of either party in the US and how all this is driving in the same direction, it's using these justifications. And it's the same way in other countries. Here it is in the UK, pointing at the same. And if I believe we'll have time to get to it, I'm going to either today or the next day, we're going to talk about the UK protests and the obvious Israeli influence, the Zionist manipulation through people like Tommy Robinson driving this whole thing. While then people on one side of the paradigm point at it and say, look, migrants. And that's the whole problem, ignoring that it's being driven very clearly by a political agenda. And within that movement, people that are not even what they seem. But the point is that using these things to go, well, here's why we need digital IDs at the border. Here's why we need biometric scans, all the things that any other moment from any other person, the right would scream foul in this country. Now, here in the UK, it's the same thing. They're announcing the use of facial recognition, which is really just saying, we're announcing the thing we've been doing forever. That's kind of how this goes, but it's still cementing this as an absolute. The alarming pledge to roll out facial recognition in response to recent disorder or chaos, in a pledge to plunder more police resources on mass surveillance that threatens rather than protects democracy. Now, this is all about the idea of these, immigration, about riots and different mobs of people running around, and we've seen how clearly, whether we're talking about the Israel conversation or any other dynamic, the United States, how they will use these things. We've seen it during the protest of the Palestinian, it's the groups around the world that were protesting in support of Palestine, where we would see these Zionist groups act in violence and the media would frame it however they wanted. Either way, it's a problem, reaction, solution scenario where they're going, here, guess what? We'll do the very thing you would have said no to, but now that you hate these people we made you hate, now you'll think it's okay. Never stops. Here in the amazing libertarian, it's kind of the fake, what's his name? Malay. Argentina. The point is that we keep talking about how obvious this is, where they're using what you think you believe, what you believe in, but pretending these people care about that, or acting like Trump is a Christian Republican. Oh, just whatever works for you to get you to think he's the one you've been waiting for. Same thing here. This guy came out screaming about libertarian values and obviously goes the other direction, and far too many just blind themselves to it because team sport politics. Argentina is now going to use artificial intelligence to predict future crimes. But experts worry for citizens' rights. I did love that latter part of it. We're doing it, but we kind of worry it could ruin your lives. But that doesn't mean we're going to stop, though. This is incredible. This is pre-crime. It's exactly what Bill Barr, during Trump's administration, and all the rest of them have rolled out. It is a classic, obvious bait and switch kind of scenario. It's happening under the right, it seems, which is exactly what anybody who sees through the paradigm has been telling you, that they use either side of this when you're not paying attention. Now, on that same point, which I found interesting, here's Malaysia, the prime minister saying, or a minister saying, they're working on an internet kill switch, which is alarming, no matter what, for whatever reason that's driving it. But here's what I find interesting. We just talked about this, where the prime minister of Malaysia got censored on Facebook for offering his condolences for the killing of the Hamas leader. And the point is, whatever you think about that, of course, he has a right to do that. But of course, Facebook censored him because you're not allowed to say that. My point is that whatever your logic is, I'm not saying I know, but let's just say for sake of conversation, he's like, well, we want to be able to stop this or control that because it doesn't matter. Whatever the justification is, you're still leading to a direction that will suppress the ability of the people in Malaysia to access information. And that very well could be the whole point, couldn't it? Problem, reaction, solution. Now, lastly, before we jump into the Wikipedia point, that goes to the very idea of irregular warfare, fifth generation warfare. I believe that's all this we're talking about right now. I believe the American people, and frankly, possibly the world, are under the focus of this right now, and in a way that we've never experienced. That COVID-19 could have been one of the beginning points of that. Now, I just pointed this out after the Bitcoin conference. It's really strange, actually. Here's the article, by the way, that Derek wrote, the co-opting of Bitcoin, that it was really relevant to this quest to this point. But Ian Carroll shared something saying, welcome to 2024, where I'm not 100% sure if this is a real or an elaborate deepfake scam. I'll tell you right now, and he sees it right away. It's obviously fake. It's exactly what I pointed out after the Bitcoin conference. It's yet again Elon Musk with the same scan thing. Don't scan it. It's a scam, and they will take all of what's in your wallets. This is huge, guys. If you look at this, it's an account with like 100,000 followers. And when I showed it to you on the Bitcoin thing, I'll play the clip. There were multiple entities, one that appeared to be Bitcoin Magazine with even the gray check on YouTube, playing it with hundreds of thousands of people watching. Millions saw this, and it was basically a repeat, like 2-minute clip that just kept recycling, pretending to be Elon, or, who knows, maybe he's involved. I don't know. But if he is, why wouldn't he be? Or if he's not, you would think he would be freaking out about this. But no one seems to care. Platforms don't care. As I understand it, this has been going on YouTube for a really long time. And people are just getting scammed, right? And they'll crack down on the most flimsy things. Look at this. It's even under the Tesla channel. Explain this for me, guys. To me, or at least a fake Tesla channel, but it does have a check. So either YouTube's involved with faking these accounts, or this is something that they're involved with through Tesla or through Elon. I don't know. I honestly would be very surprised if they would do this. But what I'm going to show you is the fact that this is a massive, and I mean like high level, not technologically, but how much money is probably flying through this and through these platforms with big names, a high level scam. I think this might be designed to just scoop up as much cryptocurrency as they can from the market, using on the tail of the Bitcoin conference, Elon Musk, and all this big right push. So she says, what's going on, Elon Musk? And tags him. Of course, no comment. There's no, not that I would always expect him to. Curious what Robbie said here. Yeah, it says YouTube's been allowing this a lot. Same exact playbook. But he says, it seems like this would have been a layup of a lawsuit for Elon, but maybe I don't understand the law. See my point? I agree. If this was Elon Musk, could have easily taken this down against YouTube, for crying out loud, or anybody. But here, let me play his clip first, and I'll show you what I saw. That's not the one. This one.
The Secret Service, which failed to prevent the attack on Trump, must reassess its actions.
So it's really low, but it says the Secret Service that failed to stop the assassination on Trump must reassess its actions. Guys, they are aiming this at the Republicans. If you're a Republican, you should ask what's going on here. Who is driving this bus? This massive thing aimed at you guys, using all the figures you've been convinced that you're supposed to support. And it is very interesting to me. And this is one element of the larger thing we're talking about today.
We cannot allow such incidents to continue. Unfortunately, I have also been targeted in 2 assassination attempts over the past 8 months, highlighting the need for enhanced security. I want to announce that I am allocating a significant...
He said right there that he was behind. 2 people have tried to kill him. I don't know if that's true. Like, I know that's not Elon, but I mean, in general, I don't even know if that's true.
To Trump's campaign through America PAC to support him at this crucial moment. I am confident that together we can make America strong and prosperous.
Same thing I saw in the last one. The comments have a few base ones, but then it's just frozen. They're not allowed to comment. But there's like 100,000 people watching this.
Returning to our event, I want to remind our audience of the importance of participating in our cryptocurrency giveaway. Visit our event website or scan the QR code on the screen, but also to be part of a larger movement at the forefront of technology and our journey into...
Yeah, see, that says Tesla. With Tesla with a confirmed YouTube check. 165,000 subscribers. Now, these things can be faked, but my point is, if this was such a high, how do you do this consecutively, continually, with so much reach and so much influence, unless there's somebody else involved with this? Like inside YouTube, Elon, something.
the crypto ecosystem.
That is weird. Look, it's pinned on the Tesla channel with the check mark. I'm with Ian. I thought I had stumbled on something crazy, but apparently it's been going on for a long time. So here's what this is my screenshot from the one that was the day after the last day of the Bitcoin conference. So they framed this as the last day of the Bitcoin conference. So people that didn't know it had ended were tuning in thinking they were watching this. And the point was that they had kind of floated some special guest that was going to show up during Trump's discussion. That's why he was an hour late. Nothing ended up happening. Nobody showed up, but everyone was saying it was Elon Musk. And so then it's a special guest. Telling you, there's something going on here. This is not by accident.
Our specialists are always in touch and ready to help. So friends, don't waste time. Scan the QR code, make deposits, and enjoy how your crypto assets double. This is our gift to you in honor of the Tesla Cybertruck 2.0 launch. Thank you all for being here and forward to new heights with Tesla. Scan the QR code again. This chance to double your assets is waiting for you. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Musk. I'm Brian Fisher from Bloomberg. I wanted to ask you how you came up with this idea of distributing cryptocurrency and what motivated you.
Of course, friends, I want to tell you a little more about how I came to this idea. I have always strived to find new ways to combine innovation and opportunities for our users. At Tesla, we are.
So right there, they pretend being a Bloomberg journalist, name him and everything. Doesn't that guy care? Doesn't it seem strange to you that nobody says anything about this?
We're always thinking about how to make your life better and more interesting. And today we are implementing another such idea, a unique crypto giveaway that allows you to double your wealth.
No matter where you're hearing that and who it's being said, but it's always fake. Guys, that's always a fake scam. Always. So I'm interested in this. You know, I mean, I get I'm not pretending that this might be real. It's obviously fake. That's obvious. What is going on here? Why is nobody stopping this? Why is it being done with major channels with hundreds of thousands of subscribers, with checks being given by YouTube, and no one stops it? The one from Elon Musk after the Bitcoin conference, the one I just showed you, that went on for like 13 hours. It just kept going. It was on a constant feed, and nobody stops that. We're being gamed, guys. And so my question is, I was just thinking about, just talking about this, and none of them, not the platforms, nor those being used, seem interested at all in stopping this. This is after Trump tries co-opting the Bitcoin community. Could this be a massive effort to relieve you of your crypto before the big swap? I genuinely want you to ask that question. Now, in this conversation of fifth generation warfare, here's WikiLeaks. This is posted as of the 3rd, so it's yesterday on their platform, on Twitter anyway. And reposting this, so it's important to think about. It says, what I think is the single most significant document that we have released, Julian, at the Wheeler Center in 2015, on the doctrine of overthrowing a government as if written by, as he said, quote, the evil Noam Chomsky. And it says it takes a 7-way pincer maneuver of U.S. national power to overthrow your government. The document leak under discussion, which I'll show you next. But listen to what he has to say first. This is what we're seeing every day, all the time, in everything they do. They are not out there to try to save people or rescue people or spread freedom. Everything they've ever done proves that to you if you just care to actually look with nonpartisan eyes.
Interestingly, if we extend outside the cables, and this book, I suppose I should hold it up, it does, it's what we would call in the intelligence world, it is an all-source intelligence book. That means, yes, the dominant archive is our 2.7 million cable archive, but it does actually source, at least the best chapters do, source across WikiLeaks general archive, which is more than 10 million documents now, from a wide variety of other places. And I'll give you an example of one of those, which is what I think is the single most significant document that we have released. It is the US Manual for Unconventional Warfare. It's active policy doctrine even now. It was created in 2008. It's
interesting date for that as well, right as the supposed collapse that was completely engineered and abused after the fact.
The doctrine for
obviously, the U.S. financial system,
U.S. special forces, for when they are overthrowing a government. So there's another one we also released called Foreign Internal Defense. That's when you're trying to support a government with U.S. special forces from being overthrown. This is how to overthrow a foreign government in order to achieve U.S. policy objectives. And there is an absence of that euphemistic language. It is like it is written by the evil Noam Chomsky. So the same kind of description of the U.S. state that Noam Chomsky would give, but this is what we do, and that's what you must do.
His point is simply that, so Noam Chomsky would outline, the evils of this kind of action, and it's just simply them stating this as if it's the same idea. Here's what we do to spread democracy, and it's like, well, you're literally outlining what, as he says, it's as if it's being written by an evil Noam Chomsky. They're framing it in a very static, kind of clinical way, but you're talking about illegal action. There's no way around it. Now, there's more there you should listen to in the rest of the ones below, but I just wanted you to hear it from his own mouth. We're talking about something that they have used to overthrow governments, to force their policy. It has nothing to do with what's best for the world, our people, or their peoples. Here's the actual page from WikiLeaks, U.S. Special Operations Forces Unconventional Warfare, September 2008. Here's the actual document. We're going to go over some of this. Army Special Operations Unconventional Warfare. Then we're going to show the one that he listed after that, which is important as well. We're not going to go into this in depth today, but foreign internal defense tactics, techniques, and procedures for special forces. So some of the stuff that stood out to me that I just want to make sure you saw. It's interesting. And just so it's very clear, and really, for those that would already just believe that this is my interpretation of this, you probably already get it. But for those that rightly so don't trust, just blindly agree with what I'm saying, and you shouldn't anyway, look for yourself and confirm this. There's just some of these points that I think are important to show you that this is just a clinical is the wrong word, but very, procedural. Like this is just what we do to achieve this end. And it's just listing things that are illegal. Because the whole context of this is irregular war. So just to show you this, it just simply says unconventional warfare is basically defined as operations conducted by, with, or through irregular forces. So that in and of itself, we're talking about people that are not on the record working for the U.S. government, stuff like that, in support of a resistance movement, usually, so this is the point, a group that's fighting from within a country that is usually fighting against the current power. Now, sometimes that can be something like the Palestinians fighting against their occupier, right? But in most cases throughout history, you can look back, like with Bolivia, for crying out loud, where they, or the moderate rebels who were the worst extreme people in Syria that were clearly terrorists, which we all know, it's this joke now, they fund them, they arm them, they support them, they help them conduct their operations. And that's a crime in every sense of the word, even if you believe in the right, even if you think they're right, fighting for the right thing. An insurgency or conventional military operations, reflecting two important criteria. Unconventional warfare must be conducted by, with, or through surrogates, and such surrogates must be irregular forces. Now, here's what it gets into. It says, consider the long-term effects. Unconventional warfare, typically long-term affairs, however, such operations can also result in the dramatic regime change in a relatively short period. What's funny is the regime change term at one point was considered conspiracy theory. Planners must analyze conditions in the area of operations in the unconditional warfare and the irregular forces involved, and they must understand the higher headquarters intent and the overall operational scheme. This analysis enables planners to effectively determine the anticipated duration of operations and to adequately plan for link-up operations and the transition of irregular elements. The units must recognize the operational scheme and may be non-military in nature. So ask yourself if it makes sense for the military to fund non-military personnel in the interest of changing the current power structure, right? I mean, that is a crime, period. Planners should consider each problem in its broader political, military, and psychological context. The units often must allow for legal and political constraints to avoid strategic failure while achieving tactical success. They must not jeopardize the success of long-term theater goals with the desire for immediate short-term success. Policies, plans, and operations must be consistent with U.S. national and theater priorities. You might expect to be law right there, but not in this case. The objectives that may support. Credibility of special operations. Significant moral and legal considerations often exist in irregular, unconventional warfare effort. Legitimacy is the most crucial factor in developing and maintaining international and internal support. Not that they have or organically, what's the right word? Not that they should deserve legitimacy. The point is that they need to manufacture legitimacy to make sure they're gaining international and internal support. It says, without the support, the United States cannot sustain assistance to an irregular force, meaning that without the support of the internal people and the world at large, we can't continue to support them. Well, that's being challenged by what they're doing in occupied Palestine right now. Without recognized legitimacy and credibility, military operations do not receive the support of the indigenous population. Yeah, exactly. Now, for a long time, it seems they've tried to do this without that part. Who cares if the indigenous populations care about what we want? We're going to do it anyway, just lie. Thus, they lean into the digital part of it, just lie about what they want on the ground. That's the point. Anticipate and control psychological effects. All operations and activities in the environment have significant psychological effects. So think about what they're saying right there. They know that what they're doing is dramatically affecting the mental health of the people they claim they're trying to save. Combat operations and civic action programs are two examples of the type of operations or activities with obvious psychological effects. These operations may conduct some operations and activities specifically to produce a desired psychological effect, otherwise known as psychological operations. A negative psychological impact may overshadow or negate a tactical victory. Recognizing that perceptions may be more important than reality in these areas, that's an important statement, must strive to ensure that all audiences understand operations. Losing control of perceptions may result in a distortion of facts and may even diminish or destroy the gains of even superbly planned and executed missions. Under the 7 phases of unconventional warfare, it says each one is unique, particularly when applied against non-state actors. However, U.S.-sponsored unconventional warfare efforts generally pass through the following 7 distinct phases. Now, think about this in the context of what you've seen of any of these. Regime change in Syria, or the attempted in Venezuela, right? The constant efforts of, again, in Haiti, in everywhere. Literally every country you could name at this point. It's just, they have marched around the world and really, the point is not even like some march around the world. They're just aimed at all of these countries with all different operations with the interest of controlling their output, of using what they have for themselves at the expense of the people in these countries, even to the level of psychological operations and kinetic warfare. But think about it, what you've seen. Preparation, that initial contact, infiltration, which is obvious what that is, organization, build-up, employment, transition. Like, 'cause you have to realize if there was some kind of discussion about how this government was doing the wrong thing, well, you're supposed to go through the international community. You're supposed to go through this discussion. You're supposed to talk about sanctions. The idea is not supposed to be one government acting with infiltration and transition of power by themselves. I know this government has built this weird thing, especially in certain parts of our paradigm, that's just what you do. Might is right. But it's not. It's illegal. And it hurts people, especially when you realize that they don't even care about doing it for those people. Some of the phases may occur simultaneously or in certain situations, not at all. For example, a large and effective resistance movement may require only logistical support, thereby bypassing the organization phase. The phases may also occur out of sequence. So there's and it says at the bottom, to be trained and organized before infiltrating back into the operational area, either with or without the units. Here it says the components of an insurgency. These terms are very clear. The units subdivide an insurgency into 3 components: guerrillas, underground, and the auxiliary. These elements are designed to be self-sufficient and self-contained, capable of centralized command but decentralized execution. Like, you have to hear, that's my point about this being like clinical and procedural. But if you just read what that's saying, they're talking about having a centralized command but a decentralized execution. So you don't see the strings attached to what they're doing. They literally wrote out documents about how to illegally overthrow governments, guys, and this goes back a long way. This is the newer versions. If you go back to the stuff at the time of Kissinger and so on, that's what I tell you. They just write it out about why sanctions are designed to hurt people for their benefit. And then it says redundant in the event that the enemy destroys a portion of the element. The insurgency support mechanisms need to remain hidden in order to survive. For this reason, they remain partially compartmentalized, dispersed, and fluid. The organization must constantly adapt to the changing security environment and avoid establishing predictable patterns. I think it's clear in and of itself. The idea being that everything about this is about trying to hide what you're doing, not just for the people you're going against, but to everybody, international community, your own people. Irregular warfare. The purpose of irregular warfare, like any other form of warfare, is to win, to achieve the strategic purpose of the war. Winning wars and campaigns involves the control of forces, populations, and territory. Conventional or traditional warfare is a form of warfare between states and employs direct military confrontation. The focus of conventional military operations is normally an adversary's armed forces. And then it says, I don't have this highlighted, so I'm trying to just quickly do it. The point, my point in all of this is already clear, I think, but there was something that stood out to me. It says it generally assumes that the indigenous populations within the operational area are non-belligerents and will accept whatever political outcome the belligerent governments impose. That means them in this case. A fundamental military objective in conventional military operations is to minimize civilian interference in those operations. In contrast, irregular warfare, which is what they're actually talking about, focuses on the control or influence of populations, not on the control of our adversary's forces. So this is what I'm talking about. So the shift over time has come from, which has always been overlapped, a situation where they talked about, all you're aiming at military. You're aiming at their forces and their kinetic military engagement. Now we're in the time of irregular warfare, where the main point has nothing to do with that. I mean, that still happens, especially when it's forced into play. But 90% of what's always going on, which is what we're always seeing happen outside of some current fields, is the influence of the populations, manipulating those populations for the outcome that you desire. It says ultimately irregular warfare is a political struggle with violent and nonviolent components. So if you accept, as they said, this is aimed at the populations, and that includes violent aspects, how do you not see that as a violent act against populations to achieve a political end, otherwise known as terrorism? The struggle is for a control or influence over and the support of a relevant population, through violent means in some cases, as they just said. The foundation for irregular warfare is the centrality of the relevant populations of the nature of the conflict. The parties to an irregular warfare conflict, whether states or armed groups, seek to undermine their adversaries' legitimacy and credibility. They seek to physically and psychologically isolate their adversaries from the relevant populations and their external supporters. At the same time, they also seek to bolster their own legitimacy and credibility to exercise authority over that same population. That's Venezuela for you right now. The cutting off of funds, the stopping of the oil trade, their no-interest loans, stealing their gold, their interest, and then saying it's all your fault. You cut them off. You stop them from being able to engage. You constantly aim this at the people, trying to convince them you're being starved by America. They don't buy it because I think the world is aware of this stuff now. But this is obvious. This is This is 2008. God only knows what they've added now. The military base, the mass base, it says, finally, although not traditionally considered a component of U.S.-sponsored insurgent or resistance movement, the larger indigenous population from which the irregular forces are drawn must be an organizational consideration. Unconditional, I don't know why I keep forgetting that. Unconventional. I just keep getting the wrong word in my head and I can't get it out. Unconventional warfare is an element of irregular warfare activity. As such, influence over a relevant population is critical. Communist insurgents of the 20th century referred to the general population as the mass base. Insurgent leaders tasked elements of the underground with infiltrating civil institutions and manipulating popular grievances and overt indigenous political activities to support insurgent objectives, manipulating what they want to achieve your ends. Many of these activities, such as strikes, labor unrest, food riots, and so on, may be effective methods of combating and weakening the adversary government. There you go. So for those on the right, who, by the way, this was written in 2008, don't forget that, and the reality that this is both sides of this that are, your government really, that are using these things, recognize they're pointing to communist insurgents and saying, that's what they did, and here's what we do. The same thing. And it says, I should finish the sentence. So they're basically saying, this is what they did. Many of these activities, like strikes, labor unrest, food riots, like the communist insurgents did, and so on, may be effective methods at combating and weakening the adversary governments without being directly associated with the insurgent effort. So for all those that are screaming about bad communism, recognize that they're using the same tactics to achieve their ends. And the whole point is about making it look like the insurgents are doing that, and you have nothing to do with it. Riots, protests, shooting of those protesters. That's what this is about, the violent aspects we just read. The participants in such a mass popular activities may be unaware of their manipulation and by and for the insurgent movement. Therefore, practitioners of this kind of warfare cannot consider these participants a direct part of the insurgent organization, meaning they're willful, useful idiots, if you will. People that are manipulated to thinking they're protesting for what they believe in, and sure enough, they're being used by the government. Yeah, that goes both ways. Therefore, it says they cannot be considered. However, practitioners should take the insurgency's use of these participants in a U.S.-sponsored unconventional warfare effort into account as an adjunct organizational factor. Therefore, unconventional warfare leaders must continuously emphasize the maintenance of influence over this group, meaning the populations of anywhere you're trying to politically manipulate, using violent tactics, driving them into unrest, food issues, protests, shooting at those protesters, using that to roll in what you want. Popular opinion. It just couldn't be more clear. And then this one gets into the actual procedures beyond that from 2003. Very important to understand this stuff. Now, Here's what he said about the overlap of Afghanistan, but this really just applies to any of these locations. As we obviously point out, Ukraine is serving this role right now, but I'm telling you, Afghanistan is not off the board here, guys. Just because they pretended like they pulled everything out, that's not the reality. Whether we're talking about Academy or Blackwater type elements or whatever else, or just genuinely boots on the ground, this is still happening all around the world. They did not completely pull out of these areas just like they pretended to in Syria. It's not the case. But here's what he has to say about this. As Richard highlights, the goal is to use, well, I'll read it afterward. He's put one word into it.
Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan, and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal. I.e., the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war.
Right. The goal, somebody had to add music to that while there's background noise. Like, my God, just let it speak for itself. But an endless war, not trying to achieve some end. It's about an ongoing endless war. And that's kind of broadened out to just multiple fields of war. Now, by every metric, this world has been in a world war pretty much since World War II. And it just has, the point is they just don't call it that these days. Another element of fifth generation warfare. But he's talking about Afghanistan, right? But it's the same thing with Ukraine. It's the same thing with a lot of these locations. And Israel is acutely involved in this. That's the transnational entity or the trinational intelligence apparatus or whatever these terms we've talked about in the past. That's the change we're in now. And he simply just adds the idea of BlackRock, as in his opinion, as that transnational elite. That's just one part of it. Now, this quote, I don't know if this is accurate. I've seen it, that paraphrasing. I have personally seen this conversation from him, and I wasn't able to find it today again, just kind of throwing it in there. And so he has made statements about Israel in the past. And I'll even show you a tweet from WikiLeaks making a similar point. But the general statement here, and let's call this paraphrasing because I'm not sure if it's the exact quote. There's a lot of stuff flying around. There's also a very shortened version of this. But my point is, make sure you check it for yourself. Don't just blindly trust me. But I have in the past seen these discussions, clips, and the conversation of the Israel overlap from specifically Julian Assange. But the quote reads, there is another country that's interfered in U.S. elections, endangered Americans living or working overseas, and has corrupted Americans' legislative and executive branches. Its ready access to mainstream media and to spread its propaganda provides it with cover for the actions, and it accomplishes all that through the agency of a powerful domestic lobby. That country is, of course, Israel. Now, that is accurate, no matter how you spin it. The point is, I think that's maybe just a paraphrasing or a longer. The point is, we have had these discussions in the past. It's very clear that the point being at the time around Russia, that it was clear he was pointing out Israel as the real culprit behind this, like a lot of us were. It's actually Israel-gate, not Russia-gate. And it was deflection. Now, that doesn't have to, it's not because this is what we want to focus on. That's just where the facts point. That's very clear. Here's what WikiLeaks posted May 30th, 2024. And we covered this story. This is when Haaretz, and this is not some kind of a parody. Haaretz was literally censored by their military censor. And that's what it looked like. It wasn't a joke. Israel's cause for detention, censored. And if you read the article, it was literally redacted just like that. It wasn't some kind of a joke, like to make a point. They were redacted. They weren't allowed to say the things. And they did this before. That's beyond the editors. Free speech in Israel, very clearly, right? WikiLeaks said, what does censorship reveal? It reveals fear, Julian Assange said. Israel's censorship regime highlighted by Haaretz in an article containing extensive redactions. The point is that a lot of people like to pretend like Israel never really got, first remember that WikiLeaks is a repository for people to leak information through. So they don't just get to pick what they cover for the most part. There's some level of that, but the point is ultimately there has been stuff coming out about Israel over the years. Look through their database. It's very clear. People love to kind of frame it as that's never been the case, but it is. You can see plenty of them. Now, here's Adam put this out, overlapping with Israel and the reality of what has driven us to these wars. That joke I've been making lately, that the only thing the two-party illusion seems to align on are Israel and war, and we're usually at war because of Israel. This is not a joke. You can look at Netanyahu's past statements, and he just did it again. 58 standing ovations driving for war with Iran. Well, as he says, who made us invade Iraq? How about Libya? Who's been working for decades to get us to invade Iran? Netanyahu, the Zionist government.
There is no question whatsoever that Saddam is seeking and is working and is advancing towards the development of nuclear weapons.
Completely false, as I hope we all can acknowledge now. I know some people are still somehow blinded by this WMD live from Iraq. Like, amazing to me. One of the most obviously debunked stories in history. And yet here he is doing it with Iran right now. And he's been doing it for 20 years, or even more. They're just about to get it. Nope. Even the U.S. intelligence has said that's not true. The International Atomic Energy Agency more than once over the years, including reasonably recently, said, nope, that's not true. And he still does it. And he still gets momentum within this government because of either blackmail, some other kind of control, or lobbying, or whatever you want to talk about. I'm not saying I know that for each individual, but it's obvious something is driving this blindness to what is completely counter to American interests, and theirs in many cases.
No question whatsoever. And there is no question that once he acquires it, history shifts immediately. There is no question that he had not given up on his nuclear program, not whatsoever. There is also no question that he was not satisfied with the arsenal of chemical and biological weapons that he had, and was trying to perfect them constantly. Saddam is hell-bent on achieving atomic bombs, atomic capabilities as soon as he can.
In this September 2002 congressional hearing, Netanyahu openly called for war on Iraq and insisted that a U.S. military invasion would be hugely beneficial for the entire Middle East.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region.
It's amazing we can't just look back at these things and go, man, it's amazing how completely incorrect he was, or otherwise lying if you understand the reality. And here we are. He just spoke in front of Congress, did the same thing all over again. Lied about damn near everything that came out of his mouth. Atrocity propaganda, fear-mongering about the Middle East. I mean, just nonstop. Things that are some of the easiest things to verify in the world right now because of how much has been shown and all the lies that have been debunked. And yet, 58 standing ovations from all of these blind followers or otherwise compromised people.
And I think that people sitting right next door in Iran, young people, and many others will say, the time of such regimes, of such despots, is gone. There is a new age. Something new is happening.
In reality, the catastrophic and illegal U.S.-led war and occupation in Iraq set the region ablaze, destabilizing numerous countries, leading to the deaths of more than 1 million people, fueling extremist Salafi jihadist groups like Al-Qaeda, and eventually giving birth to ISIS. But Netanyahu was an absolutist. He declared that there was no other option but to dismantle the government in Baghdad.
2 decades ago, it was possible to thwart Saddam's nuclear ambitions by bombing a single installation. But today, nothing less than dismantling his regime will do. Because Saddam's nuclear program has fundamentally changed in those 2 decades. He no longer needs one large reactor to produce the deadly material necessary for atomic bombs. He can produce it in centrifuges the size of washing machines that can be hidden throughout the country. And I want to remind you that Iraq is a very big country.
Yet Netanyahu's lies didn't stop there. He also said the same of Iran and Libya.
The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran. And Iran, by the way, is also outpacing Iraq in the development of ballistic missile systems that they hope will reach the eastern seaboard of the United States within 15 years. Now the question is, what's your next step? Knowing that 3 of these nations are developing nuclear weapons. This is not a hypothesis. It is fact.
He lied.
Iraq, Iran, and Libya are racing to develop nuclear weapons.
Right. He lied. He lied about all of it. Very easily shown to be lies. Even at that time, by the way. And let's not forget, he's also on record, well, leaked, but many videos you can now see of him speaking with people about how he can do this, how easy it is to manipulate the U.S. Congress. You don't think they've seen that? So that's why that shows me that they must be compromised somehow. I mean, these people are all very petty, small people. You'd think that they would be pretty outraged if they saw, well, he's gloating about how he can manipulate us. I mean, you guys can decide for yourselves, but I think it's pretty shocking to see that. Now, this was going to be said later, but I think this is an important one to show real quick. Wherever it was, it's right here, I think. Probably right next as usual. Damn it. Maybe it was right next. Oh, wait, hold on. We'll come back to all of this. I'm going to get to all of this for sure. Here it is. I think this is important to highlight. This account in general has put out the good stuff around COVID and so on. The point is that there's a lot of people out there getting a little bit fast and loose with things, especially when it comes to partisan conversation. She says, breaking, Iran has now publicly announced for the first time that it has nuclear weapons. Quote, we have obtained nuclear weapons, but not have announced it, said Iranian politician Ahmed Ardestani. And you know why you probably remember that name? Because we already covered this back when it was breaking back in May, when it was the exact same story coming from Fox News. It was coming from Israeli media. So why it's all of a sudden being repopulated throughout the conversation, even though it's not a breaking story and it wasn't real at that time. As I said, this is easy to debunk claim that it's been inserted into our media by a desperate Israel. And it's already been shown to be entirely false by TLAV and others back when it was first floated in May. So one, it's not breaking, and two, it's verifiably false. And this is the kind of dangerous stuff that right now the right is being driven to seed through the conversation. And even then, even if it was real, which it's not, just one person like a Lindsey Graham standing up and saying something does not therefore mean that's the reality. It has been shown by, first of all, like I just said, the intelligence of this country, not that we should trust what they have to say, but forever has been blindly supporting what the Israeli government was saying. For whatever reason, over the last so many years, they've said, no, it's not accurate. And the International Atomic Energy Agency has also said the same, despite Amano, the previous Japanese person in charge who was assassinated by Israel, that I think we can easily prove, because he was highlighting they were lying. They still at this point have now come back to saying, nope, there's no evidence for that. And realize he's been saying it for however long, decades, moments away. He lied, and we just heard him lie on the record about Libya and Iraq, and people still don't want to believe that it's partisanship. It is team sport politics. Now, as Philip Giraldi says about Netanyahu, and for those on the podcast, it's that disgusting picture of him being basically mobbed by our U.S. Congress, both sides all clapping and wanting to touch him while he's walking into Congress. And he says, our country has done many bad things, but this wholehearted alliance with unmitigated evil is a betrayal of the birthright of every American. I really hope that resonates with some of the people out there, especially being played right now. Now, Dan Kervek also points out that if you remember Collateral Murder, the video that really put WikiLeaks on the map, or for most people, the one showing that they were murdering Reuters journalists and they tried to cover it up. Then they put him in jail till recently because of that, even though he was the one exposing the crime. As they write, Julian Assange is in prison, or was at the time, this was on February, for revealing scenes just like this. But the Israelis broadcast them proudly as part of their terror campaign. Think about how crazy that is. And that's exactly what this you've seen this video. And this is very clearly what it was, is now even the backstory, now the looking back, that's the reality of this picture. Israeli military published footage where they claim they were bombing terrorists, but it turns out, even with that kid with a bike, they claimed was a rocket launcher, and that was proven that it was just a bike. Same thing. It's a couple of people trying to start a motorcycle because they have no fuel, and they just try to push it out of the way, and they get bombed. The point is, that's a murder. That's a crime. It's murder. And Julian Assange tried to expose this back then, and now it's just a daily occurrence, and they're literally posting it themselves. And to end this segment, before we talk about something around specifically Venezuela, and we're going to get to the bots as well. I think that's an important conversation around the bots. But Kenneth Roth shows this clip, and this is about Donald Trump. Now, it's coming from corporate media, but it's not. It's really, the point is whether or not you even take this at face value, which you never should from anybody. I just want people to understand this is what they all are. All of them. This is what politics truly is. Bribery and manipulation. Guys, it goes back to the end of time, to the beginning of time. People in power, this is what we see. Now, yes, there's occasionally people that are at least trying to act with good intentions or with morals or integrity, but when you get a system that becomes so disgusting, so where the worst of human nature is praised, those people find it harder and harder to exist or even make it into that center. So my point is, this is a clip about $10 million, and where's my favorite dictator? As I've said many times, Sisi of Egypt and Donald Trump. Which, of course, people on Trump's side will probably just blatantly disregard this because I don't want to look at it because it makes Trump look bad. But it's all of them. Biden, Ukraine, it's everywhere. But recognize this is no different. As I said, this is what they all do. This is simply politics. It always has been. This is in no way to say that we are incapable of changing that. First, we must actually acknowledge that we have this problem. not just one side, but the whole government problem, then maybe we can strike a new path.
One of the first big lies Donald Trump told after announcing his campaign for the White House in 2016 was that his campaign would be totally self-funded. That, of course, was not true. Trump only self-funded about 20% of that campaign and turned to donors and super PACs to pick up the tab whenever possible. But at the very end of October, less than 2 weeks before the 2016 election, the famously cheap Donald Trump opened up his wallet.
Today I wrote another check for $10 million. I'm spending money like crazy.
And just ignore the famously cheap nonsense, stuff like that. Just put that aside, listen to the meat of what they're going to get to. And I find this interesting because if you're able to look at this through a nonpartisan lens, the facts are there, right? The stuff that the money transaction, I'm sure he has his own version of the story. But I'm just saying this because it's easy to kind of immediately, corporate media. That's always the case. And for people like us that see through both sides of it, we look at that way for all of them, whether it's Trump or Biden talking, go, oh, here we go, right? The reality is they're all always doing that. And the paradigm just seems to blind it to one side.
Today, the Washington Post is out with breathtaking new reporting that paints that last-minute $10 million cash infusion in a whole new light. The U.S. government had classified intelligence indicating that Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi tried to give Trump $10 million to boost his campaign at almost the exact same time. In September of 2016, candidate Trump, who was already calling for his infamous Muslim ban, met on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly for a closed-door meeting with the Egyptian president.
He's a fantastic guy. He took control of Egypt, and he really took control of it. And I thought it was a great meeting. We met for a long time, actually. We had a long meeting and got along. There was a good chemistry there. You know, when you have good chemistry with people, you're the king of that. And there was a very good chemistry, good feeling between us.
About a month after that great meeting, Trump gave his campaign that $10 million check. And then a few months after that, just 5 days before Trump was sworn into office, the Washington Post reports that a bank branch in Cairo received an unusual letter from an organization linked to the Egyptian intelligence service. It asked the bank to kindly withdraw nearly $10 million from the organization's account, all in cash. Inside the state-run National Bank of Egypt, employees were soon busy placing bundles of $100 bills into 2 large bags, according to records from the bank. 4 men arrived and carried away the bags, which U.S. officials later described in sealed court filings as weighing a combined 200 pounds and containing what was then a sizable share of Egypt's reserve of U.S. currency. Now, there are a few incredibly important pieces of context here. One is that this kind of cash transaction being a potential bribe from the Egyptian government is very much within the realm of possibility. New Jersey Senator Democrat Bob Menendez was just convicted last month on charges of accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars of bribes in the form of envelopes full of cash, as well as literal gold bars. Cash and gold bars that came from Egyptian intelligence agents from the same agency involved in this nearly $10 million cash withdrawal. The other key piece of context here is that Egyptian President al-Sisi is not, as Trump put it, a fantastic guy. He is an authoritarian despot who overthrew Egypt's government with military force in 2013 and has stayed in power through sham elections since then. But despite that fact, President el-Sisi was one of the first guests President Trump invited to the White House and one of the first foreign leaders Trump met with on his very first international trip. Throughout all of his presidency, Trump cozied up to el-Sisi, despite el-Sisi's brutal crackdowns on political opposition and his blatant consolidation of power and his disregard for human rights. At one point, Trump was even overheard calling President el-Sisi his favorite dictator. Clearly, there is more than one. So all of this, the classified U.S. intelligence that el-Sisi tried to give Trump $10 million, the $10 million cash withdrawal by Egyptian intelligence outside of Cairo, all of this is red hot. So why are we just learning about it now? Well, the other half of this incredible new piece from the Washington Post is about how federal prosecutors investigated all of this for years. And then, knowing everything I just laid out, Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr, seems to have made that investigation just go away.
Right. So for those of us that can stand back and look at this through the nonpartisan lens, this is the same thing no matter where you look. Different varying degrees. Certainly certain sides of the paradigm care about certain types of things more than others. But for just an objective reality, this is what they're all doing. Shutting down, and this is what kills me, that we get stuck in this constant round, this hamster wheel of pointing at the other side like the damn scarecrow from the Wizard of Oz, and it just never stops. But of course, I'll be called a left wing whatever because I'm even talking about that. It's just, as I always point out, from day to day, I'm a white supremacist Nazi or I'm a left wing snowflake shill, whatever, because the one side or the one topic is, even though if you look at our conversations, if you look at what I've been saying for 10 years, other than adding new information, my stances are damn consistent. I've said the same things about the same people, and I've had the similar opinions for a very long time, adding new information that evolve those opinions. But I think it's funny how the paradigm oscillates around us, and you change based on their current point. Each side loves to point the other side and say, I support the current thing or whatever. They're all doing it. They're all doing it based on what they're told, the new dangly cat toy. And I think it's important to call this out today. Now, I'm going to go fast on some of this. I only got about an hour left, a little less, actually. So Venezuela is important. Now, I'm going to breeze through this part about human shields, but I wanted to show you this because I want to make sure we got to the bot part. That's the important part for me today. Now, Rania, and Venezuela is important because, as we're talking about in a general sense, is this worldwide fifth-generation concept, which clearly involves regime change and unconventional warfare. As she writes, the U.S. is not only refusing to accept Venezuela's election results, so just like with Guaido, the same damn thing starting all over again, it has crowned the man who lost as president. Like, how do you possibly do that? Like, think about this. Even if you argue that they lied and they cheated, then that would by default mean that you don't even truly know who won. How are you pretending that you somehow, U.S. government, have insight into the actual results when through their very process, it's whether you think Maduro's lying or not, you're claiming they cheated, right? So how can you then claim to know exactly in what ways and where to get the real number? Just think about how really stupid that is. So if you are pretending he cheated, then there should be some kind of a process, as Venezuelans should decide, not the U.S. government, to go through and check that process. Not have you stand up and go, this is the truth, and we declare. It's just so embarrassing how they act like democracy and then just state who's in charge. Or Newland will put up the very people after a murdering regime change tactic in Maidan Square who they want to be in power in Ukraine, right? Or with Bolivia. We declare a military junta, democracy. It's just painful how bad this is. She says the U.S. is not only refusing to accept him, they've just crowned it's Gonzalez as president. She says it's so unbelievably anti-democratic, and it's not for me. It's not even about democracy. I don't believe in mob rule. It's just simply not. It is counter to the actual concept of a representative government. The U.S. failed to overthrow the results through violence. So it's in which they did. There was very clear violence being carried out, as I showed you, at least in the last show we did on this. Same stuff you've seen in the past. Terribly violent stuff, as Abby Martin's discussed, Fiorella, all the ones we discussed before in the past. So now it's repeating its Guaido script. They think Venezuela is their colony. That's very clear. Let's not forget in the past, by the way, this is just from October in 2023. And it's interesting timing, by the way, but it says U.S. eases sanctions on Venezuelan oil after Maduro agrees to elections. This is a few days after October, or a week or so after October 7th. I just find that interesting. Talking about fifth generation warfare. Israel has an interest in what's going on in Venezuela. And don't forget, Machado, one of the people involved with Gonzalez, wrote a letter to Netanyahu in 2018 asking him for regime change. Now think about how silly that is. And then we can't stand back and recognize how obvious that is. Right? So they're saying, please change this government for us. Is that democracy? Here's the actual letter. You can read it for yourself, written directly to, and this is, thank you, Alex Rubinstein, for putting this out. 2018, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, we desperately need a regime change. Well, let's just name that democracy when you want to. This is to show you that the U.S. government, after screaming they're the biggest third party democracy, is like, well, we need something, so never mind. Yeah, clearly you care about law and rules and stuff, unless you have a reason not to, right? Very, very, all the integrity in the world. And the point is, agree to elections. So you're going, hey, dictator, who's the biggest terrorist in the world. In some cases, we want to frame it that way, and narco, and whatever else. We'll let you run for the election. Go. Oh, but it looks like he won. So never mind. You cheated. It's exactly what they do with what you could claim that happened with Hamas, which I still argue. I think that was set up for them to win, as Netanyahu's statements make clear. But even their narrative is that Hamas won, and they just were like, never mind. We don't agree with that. It's like, so you don't believe in democracy. Painful. Fiorella breaking down some more of the information. And this is posted as of yesterday, or day before yesterday. After fully counting more precincts, Maduro has increased his lead to 51.95% to Gonzalez's 43.18. Putin officially invited Maduro to the BRICS summit, which of course to every two people on certain sides will just mean he's the bad guy, which is a very childish and binary way of looking at things. A huge FU to the U.S. and NATO conversation. No coincidence the State Department goons have recognized, as she puts it, Gonzales Guaido. Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico put out statements calling on respecting their election. Washington's clearly threatened by where the world is going and needs Venezuela, a vital symbol of the anti-imperialism, to become the next Argentina. But with China, Russia, and other countries recognizing its elections and the power and resilience of the Venezuelan people, which I agree with, I doubt it'll be possible, she says. I agree with that. Here's an interesting overlap. I don't know how I feel about Jackson Hinkle. I think he says a lot of things I agree with, but I also find a lot of what he puts out to be, whether it's intentional or not, sometimes deceptive, incorrect. But it's about overall, you guys can decide for yourselves. My point is about intention, and I'm not sure where I stand on that from him. It's my opinion anyway. I'm only saying that because this is interesting, because he's taken this weird central role. He's in Venezuela. I highlight him as one of the parts of the right supporting this, but he is there taking questions, and he's being framed as, it's interesting. I just have a suspicion about whether this is more not what it looks like, kind of a plant conversation, but you guys can decide either way. Here he is speaking back and forth with Maduro. And he says, Elon Musk is nothing but a product of the Pentagon. The story about how he's intelligent, how he recreated the rocket technology, they can tell you that tale to someone else. Venezuelan President Maduro speaks to Jackson Hinkle on the truth about Elon Musk.
So my question is, what do you think is in the interest of people like Elon Musk, who are continuing to sell these insane lies about you, your country, and your people?
Which I agree with that 100%. He says Elon Musk is a part of the new generation of billionaires linked to high technology. See how interesting that is? Whether or not you think he's saying that because that's what we think, he's still tapping right into what I think is the important reality that most people in power are desperate to ignore. The technocratic revolution that is going against people's wishes, right? Biometric control and so on. That's what he's highlighting. He says, him, Zuckerberg, and Jeff Bezos and others, they are the product of the Pentagon. I agree, as I think a lot of people do. All the technology developed at the Pentagon, he says, was given to them to develop social networks, satellites, communications. Look at that. Internet, and to be the face of the U.S. empire from private enterprise. That is the public-private partnership. He's speaking a very important thing. Right? If there are people in the world that want to see him through the lens of what the U.S. frames, this will change their mind, I think. But they have a commanding position in the U.S., he says. And they want to have a position of command and dominance in the world. So why did Elon Musk lead the coup against Evo Morales? Yes, for lithium and for Bolivia's natural wealth. He said it. Of course I did. He put it out at Works and said he was in a position. Saying Elon Musk essentially admitted that was why he did it. To overthrow any government in the world. We can coup whoever we want, he said. Elon Musk said as well to other barbarities he is involved with Blackwater Academy. Eric Prince. In other words, they are the internet cowboys of the 21st century. Interesting. Yeah, I get it. Like, this very well could just be him saying whatever we want to hear. But as Fiorella points out, like, this is a threatening presence, guys, to what they're doing. He is the Evo Morales of right now, of that time. Evo Morales is the one standing up and calling out their biological warfare and whatever. He's telling you as it is. That's not to say he's not has. I don't trust any of these guys, any of these governments. I think they're all part of the problem. But I can still highlight, yes, that's true right there. What are you saying? We're going to sweep away whoever they want, they believe. So what does he want? What does Elon Musk represent? The power of imperialism, billionaires, high technology. And they come from the Pentagon. The story about how they are very intelligent. And yeah, I read that to you. I'll leave it there for time. Very interesting, though, is it not? Whether or not this guy is genuine or not, that's clearly a threat to their power structure. Here, day 3 of a massive march in Venezuela, and this is from the first, people marching down the streets, as long as the eye can see, supporting Maduro, which is easy to tell. Alan McLeod points out that more than 40 countries have recognized and endorsed the results of the Venezuelan election. It's a lot. 5 countries have endorsed Gonzalez: Argentina, Costa Rica, Peru, Uruguay, and USA. Isn't that interesting? Now, what you'll note is an interesting, quiet, lack of statement from Israel. When usually they can't stop at screen. That tells me something. Doesn't have to mean it's the absence of something's not proof, but it is a good indication. Now, quickly, just on the concept of human shields, I was going to make a point to include this with this overarching conversation, but this is just a quick clip where I'll play this real quick. It's a short one of this guy accidentally saying exploiting countries, which is what they do.
Working capital and expertise and standards to Africa so that we can keep exploiting. So that we can exploring where we can get these minerals.
Oops. I very well could just misread the word, but that's quite the Freudian slip. I think they're all very aware what they're doing. As well before the U.S. empire, have been exploiting Africa and all these different locations. Here is Press TV pointing out that, yet again, this is coming back up again because the world is shifting and it is a time to try to take advantage of this for everybody. Iraq to release a timetable for the expulsion of U.S. forces. Now, they've kept floating this idea like that's going to happen, but that will never happen unless they make it happen. And even then, I bet you they push back anyway like they did last time. And the U.S. says, we're not going to do that, but we respect your sovereignty. Even that means that they're counterintuitive. They voted them out. They didn't leave. They're an occupier, which is what we know that they are. But people are finding the courage, like Burkina Faso saying, we're going to keep our gold, make a gold-backed currency now. Something's going to happen. I can promise you that. But people of the world like us need to highlight these things for what they are and stand behind them, like with Palestine. Casey Wright points out that the State Department advised U.S. citizens to leave Lebanon, but not Israel. He said this is a tacit admission that Israel targets civilians, but Hezbollah does not. Or a question he asked, but I think that's a good point. So they're telling you, get the hell out of Lebanon. They're also telling you to get the hell out of Gaza, both of which are highlighting the fact that they are bombing civilians. I was going to get to a point about this, Lebanon basically telling them to leave. But that's the point about this advisory in both places. It seems to suggest they know they're going to target civilians. And that's what this draft really is about Gaza, which I find interesting. It literally says, if you decide to travel to Gaza, be prepared for an indefinite stay because they closed down the crossings. That's a crime. Households with infants and young children should plan for food supplies because there's no food. That's a crime. Draft a will and designate appropriate insurance because you may die. Leave DNA samples for your medical. I mean, think about that. You think that's because Hamas is using human? I mean, my God, they're literally because Israel's just murdering everybody. He points out this page of Lebanon. Ivan Levy saying extraordinary image on homepage of BBC showing Israeli interceptions of rockets from Hezbollah. Iran explicitly warning it will target civilians in Israel. That's blatantly lying. Blatantly. None of them are saying that. Not even remotely. Not even through some here's what they actually mean. This guy is just a desperate liar. I mean, I hope that's the thing, is recognize how embarrassing that is. He has to make these lies up because they know, that means they know that they're losing and lying. I love that. Look at him and know that he knows he's lying and that is obviously because they're desperate. Now, here they're pointing out how the leaders are running and hiding in their bunkers. My point from there was to show you, one, that means they're using their population as human shields, as we keep showing you in the past. And I was going to make a point to show you that. Israel accused of Hamas of using human shields while they embed in civilian areas in Lebanon, which is right now. But also the larger conversation, as we've already shown you, as Haaretz wrote, does the presence of their headquarters for the IDF in Tel Aviv endanger their population? The answer is yes. And they know that. They wrote about it. Here's one of the images This is from the article. Israel also regularly accuses Hamas of hiding in facilities and civilian buildings, as they literally are implanting themselves in civilian locations all around the world. As the IDF points out this location, going, look at where they're bombing. They're hurting civilians. Well, that's exactly where the headquarters is. See how that works? That's from the Haaretz article. Israel uses them as human shields, and that's been written about. Here's a look inside their Fortress of Zion command center. I was going to go over some of this. We'll go back to it later. Using their own people as human shields. Here is IDF sources speaking with Irish media. IDF uses Palestinians as human shields 1,200 times in the last 5 years, according to the IDF officials themselves. It's everywhere. The one we just saw, human shields. Now this, actually, we're going to run past this really quickly. This is the part about Iran. Unfortunately, I just have limited time, guys, so I want to make sure we got to the main point I wanted to finish with around the bots, because that's the important part for the main title of the show. But this was just an overarching, the main point about there's a lie going around. So New York Times puts out this article claiming there was a bomb planted. It turns out that they just verified that it was actually a missile that was shot from inside the area from a different location, which is, we're being played. This is all coming back to the fifth generation warfare, the lies about what's going on, the internal psychological operations, the lies about Iran suddenly have nuclear weapons being driven into the conversation. Here's the old article from May showing you that's where that comes from. Declares they have a nuclear bomb. They lied, guys. They're making this stuff up. Here is internal people on Channel 12 from Israel's media government saying in recent days, saying that they need to initiate a preemptive strike on Iran. That's being floated right now in Israeli media. That's incredibly alarming. Jackson Hinkle put out this tweet that appears to be false. I did check this. It is a real tweet he put out saying, breaking, there's a nonstop flow of Russian military transport planes to Iran. Now, Vanessa Beeley argues that's completely fake. You guys do your own research. I would err on Vanessa's side of this because she's an amazing investigative journalist. So I just wonder why this stuff's being floated. Now, Ana Fuentes points out a really alarming development, and I haven't got a chance to dive through this. I got it right before we went live, but this is a real bill that Lindsey Graham put out, literally calling to strike Iran, to bomb Iran in the midst of all of this. It's Resolution 106, a joint resolution to authorize the use of U.S. forces against Iran. Guys, this is absolute lunacy. People like Lindsey Graham are literally marching people. Like, if this passes, this is the destruction of everything we know. That's completely. It's going to cause very serious warfare. They know that. They don't care. This is Israel driving the U.S. to conduct war on its behalf. If you can't see that by now, you're being played by both your government and Israel. And of course, the Axios and pretty much everybody are now pretending that Biden is threatening Netanyahu to stand down, despite the fact that they're literally deploying military personnel to the ground. And I just covered this in the last show. U.S. troops deployed to defend Israel. I got a lot of pushback. People going, that's not what it means. Yes, it is, guys. Yes, it is. Here's Douglas McGregor. 4,000 U.S. Marines and sailors headed to the Middle East. This is being deployed. This is real stuff. And people just don't want to talk about it. And Glenn Greenwald asking who actually ordered this. Is it senile Biden that they just called crazy? It's either way. They're now sending carrier strike groups to the Middle East. This is not a joke. This is not something that we should be laughed off. Arsen Atrovsky, supposed pretend human rights lawyer from Israel, is literally calling out a NATO member for being against Israel. Like, think about where these lines are being drawn. All these arguments of NATO and the one strike, you strike one, you strike all, and they're started to call out Turkey. Now, Max highlighted this. This is an important point about the overall infiltration. He says it's now clear the Zionist billionaire class has bought both U.S. political parties and erased all red lines on Israeli criminality. Driving for war with Iran, the Adelson-Sabian axis ensures the State Department serves as Israel's lawyer and the U.S. military as Israel's reserve force.
Yahoo is posing or intending to pose as the true leader of the United States who commands the affection of the leadership of both parties. And what this shows is not what Netanyahu actually intends to portray. It exposes the same corruption of the American political system that led to the rise of Joe Biden, propelled by pro-war, pro-Wall Street billionaires, and the demise of Biden, undone by those same billionaires. That billionaire class is the reason why Netanyahu is being invited here. That's why we're here 9 months in, because of this, the corruption of American politics by pro-war billionaires who essentially control both parties and control Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump, who is set to meet with Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago on Friday.
Which already happened, right? And the point is, Adelson money was conditioned on the idea of allowing illegal occupation further of the West Bank, annexation. It's all right there for you, and there's a lot of partisan screamers that are just desperate to keep you looking any other direction. James Lee put this out. Make sure you watch the full video, by the way. He said he spent the last 2 months deep diving into the ADL. I'm sure he's going to get a lot of hate for this, and manufactured kind of illusory hate that comes from bot farms, but still it's going to happen, calling him a racist for pointing out the obvious. He says the world's most powerful, quote, civil rights organization, and what I found is more disturbing than I could have imagined. Surveillance of American citizens via a network of spies, alignment and coordination with Israeli intelligence, not an American group, censorship via big tech algorithms, training law enforcement and FBI, partners with financial institutions, weaponization of anti-Semitism, all on behalf of a certain foreign nation. Realize that this is not what it appears to be, guys. This is terrifying stuff, and it ties back to the same fifth-generation warfare, psychological manipulation. This is aimed at Americans, and your government is supporting it and allowing it to happen. And we remember the surveillance point. We even highlighted this when that clip got leaked from Greenblatt, where he said, we have people in their groups. So this means a foreign entity has spies inside American protest groups. Here's what he said about this.
Signage is on this building. It says Broadridge over there. It says some other company. It's almost like they don't want us to know that they're here. This is 605 3rd Avenue in Manhattan, one of New York City's most expensive office buildings and the headquarters of the Anti-Defamation League, a civil rights organization that was supposedly founded to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment for all. That sounds all well and good. I mean, I would imagine most people would be on board for that. But after months of research into the ADL, including conversations with investigative journalists and Jewish peace activists, I discovered a much darker and more sinister reality, with the organization's power far greater than anyone could ever imagine. The Anti-Defamation League was founded in September of 1913 by the Independent Order of B'nai B'rith, a Jewish service organization to combat anti-Semitism and secure fair treatment for the Jewish people in the wake of the controversial murder conviction of Leo Frank, a Jewish factory manager in Atlanta who was accused and convicted of raping and murdering his 13-year-old employee Mary Fagan, in a trial some historians now say was marred by anti-Semitism and discrimination.
Make sure you watch it, because it is everything we've already talked about. And here is the post we did on February 2024, Zionism versus Nazism and the undeniable overlaps that you can literally look up on Wikipedia, but you get called a racist for saying it out loud. Israel's connection to extremist ideology and ADL's faking of Nazi marches. This goes back a long way, because their mandate, it seems, is to manufacture the justification for the existence of Zionism and its control of Judaism. That's what it seems to me. Make sure you watch it. It's important. Now, David Miller is highlighting Censored Man's amazing thread on these bots, which overlaps with the same thing we just talked about. In fact, I didn't even grab that. I forgot about it. Shoot. Oh, here's this show I did anyway, where I literally stumbled into this because of that ridiculous, childish, very unintelligent bot who was pretending to be me. So I went to go flag it with Twitter and realized, oh my gosh, they're still using Authentics. Literally still using it. And I think that's, I don't have time to grab it real quick. It's all in here. And you can still bring up the page right now where it asks you to check to confirm that they can take your biometric data and hold it. And that's not even something Twitter needs. It's an Israeli-connected Unit 8200 overlap company that is not about it's not about keeping you safe. It's overlap acutely with Israeli intelligence. Same point here. This is what some Censor Man pointed out. I think it was CHEQ, the company they hired to stop the bot problem on Twitter. Guess what? They did the exact opposite because it's another Israeli company. As David Miller points out, excellent thread in which it is revealed that the Zionist regime is flooding Twitter with bots, pretending to be Americans. That's what this is all really about. That's your fifth generation warfare against Americans. And the right seems to blindly support it right now. And that's the Republican Teams for Politics side, not all conservatives. And he says Twitter is taking action to thwart this by employing an ex-Israeli intelligence operative recommended by Netanyahu, which is not doing anything like that. They're, in fact, making it worse. As usual, Zionists playing both ends of every game. Here is the thread itself. He highlights the same point about that company, saying, in June, the Times released an article revealing that the Israeli Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, a literal department of the Israeli government, set up a campaign using hundreds of Israeli bots posing as real Americans. These bots posted pro-Israel content across various social media platforms, including Twitter, primarily targeting Black Democratic lawmakers, urging them to continue funding Israel's war on Gaza. What this shows is that the Israeli government is directly involved in botting Twitter and creating fake profiles in order to shape a pro-Israel narrative. This is just one instance of Israeli bots on Twitter, but believe me, he says there are thousands. He's not wrong. It's pretty easy to show. In fact, he made a great point about how he figured that out. But he goes, so who's battling these bots? That would be a former Israeli intelligence officer guy. And he's, I don't know how to pronounce that, Tai Tutovich. And how did Elon find this guy to battle Israeli bots on Twitter? Well, that's because Netanyahu himself asked Elon to have a meeting with him during Elon's visit after October 7th. During the meeting, they discussed the following topics: Palestine, Israel, anti-Semitism, misinformation, bots on Twitter. So yes, Israel supplies the bots, and Israel pretends to battle them. Israel, CHEQ, to help Musk battle bots on X. How ridiculous. He goes, and I actually found an Israeli bot farm on X. That's important. When public likes were still a thing, he found an Israeli bot farm. The bots would target pro-Palestinian content and reply with something pro-Israel, just like that bot that I was showing you. Does the same thing every time. Then the other bots in the network would instantly like that tweet, making the comment more visible. So that's a whole like network situation. He says, I knew the tweets were like botted because they would have 5 views and over 60 likes. That is impossible without bots. He goes, and I'm not even kidding. Literally, the next day, public likes became completely disabled on Twitter, making it basically impossible to find the bots. Probably just a coincidence, but what are the chances? Well, I'll let you decide if that's a coincidence or not. Clearly seems to be driving in the direction of exactly what Israel and Twitter are accomplishing. But he goes, Israel community notes, he says, yeah, this one was weird. What happened was that whenever somebody posted a photo from the aftermath of the Nova Festival, no matter what the caption was, a community note would appear. Basically, these images would be saying, this was debunked, whether or not you were just showing the image. It's clear that this is being driven by Israeli interest, and Twitter and Elon are blindly allowing it willfully. I think not in the knowledge that it's happening. That's crazy to me. Now, this is not a new topic, guys. This person points out, we need public likes back, Elon. And the point was, Censored Man says it was even optional at one point. There was no need to make it mandatory, right? So at one point, as he said, you can now hide your likes, right? So anybody out there could have done that. So instead, after that, he said, never mind, we're going to disable them entirely. How do you not see that as exactly what it looks like? I agree with Censored Man. It doesn't line up. Now, in the bottom of this person says, well done and very revealing. There's also the JIDF, paid Israeli shills on the internet. I'll just add that for you to look into for yourself. There's a lot of these overlaps. Now, here is The Guardian talking about this back in 2010. Wikipedia editing courses launched by Zionist groups. Right? So this is all right on the surface. They're actively, and this, ask yourself why Wikipedia became such a central source with YouTube, your U.S. government, Twitter, using it as a, even though you weren't allowed to use it as a source in college papers. Why? Because they happily tell you it was not a proper source because it was, and that's why it became a central usable thing through the propaganda, because Israel drove that into reality because of things just like this. Here's a couple of clips showing you that.
Moetzet Yesha, in conjunction with My Israel, has a
current prime minister
arranged instruction day for wiki editors. The goal of the day is to teach people how to edit in Wikipedia, which is the number one source of information today in the world. As a way of example, if someone searches the Gaza flotilla, we want to be there. We want to be the guys who influence what is written there, how.
Yeah, and lie about it. Blatantly lie about the fact that you aren't hurting people that are just coming to feed starving people that you won't let have food, or arresting people like Joe Meter, who is a USS Liberty survivor who was arrested as an American and your government didn't say anything about it, or just the nonstop violence against anybody trying to help people in Gaza. Right? That's what they're talking about. Violent attacks on peaceful protesters, and he wants to influence the decision, which they let them, or rather the perception.
It's written, and to ensure that it's balanced and Zionist in nature.
I came here to learn.
Yeah, Zionist in nature. They're not even trying to hide it. Zionist in nature.
Learn more about how we as Israelis and as Jews can defend Israel online, on the internet, and particularly in Wikipedia in this case.
This is Hasbara. Look it up. It's not a secret thing. As much as people try to act like it's a conspiracy theory, it's a public arm of their propaganda. And it's listed right on the surface what it is. It's Israeli propaganda to influence the outcome. Right? Not necessarily, the truth doesn't even play a factor.
Wikipedia is a bit of a complex system, and it's sometimes hard to figure out the rules. I've personally tried to edit things in Wikipedia that were against Israel, small things, and my changes were erased or undone, and I didn't understand why. And I think that this kind of knowledge is important for anyone who wants to be active in defending Israel on the internet.
I'm sure you may argue they think what they're doing is the right thing, but just anything bad against them, they want to try to change. Right? It's not about the reality of the situation.
So that we can go and we can see the information and we can say this isn't quite right. It's showing one side of the story, and I have the power and the right to change that. And in general, it's so important for us to be online, working to defend ourselves and to prove to the world and to ourselves that we are just and we are right. And because right now, if you look online...
All right, that's enough. I have no time. Here's the other one.
Well known nowadays that what happens on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube has great influence on events as they occur on the ground. The internet, too, is a battleground. It is thus comforting to learn that the IDF employs soldiers whose job titles are new to the military world. The IDF now has soldiers who tweet, share, like, and more.
I just wrote a tweet about how many suspected terrorists were arrested in the West Bank last night. About every day we update the Twitter first thing in the morning how many were arrested, and I just wrote a tweet about it.
What kind of comments do you get to that kind of tweet?
For the most part, we get retweets, which are basically when the user takes what we tweeted out and they make it their status on Twitter. And
yeah, same point. I mean, it's very, very blatant. It's not, even if you think they're doing it in what they think is the truth, you're talking about a coordinated campaign to influence things on social media using fake information. In some cases, not just as the idea, but the provable reality, if you read these, is making fake bot accounts, pretending to be Americans. That's what we're talking about. Here's a 2013 example from the BBC. Israel, government pays students to fight internet battles, right? Even more obvious. Now, in regard to Ukraine, we saw the same thing. Here's ignorance of the root and stem of all evil, showing you the Ukrainian bot. But don't forget, it's being driven by Israel. The Azov movement is funded by the U.S., by Israel, by the same blob. It's obvious. And you could see on this how many bots these things are. Look at this. Same exact tweet. Yeah, Ukraine needs help. The real war is there. Same flag, different accounts, just nonstop. It was overwhelming. Same thing, guys. It's exactly the same thing. Now, here is Director Wray, Brian Krasenstein, who blindly believes what he has to say, says FBI Director Christopher Wray, by the way, who Trump appointed, by the way, or put into place, has just stated that Russian bots are working on social media to sell narratives about Ukraine using AI. See how that works? So now that everyone's starting to pay attention to this very clear problem and you see the culprit, they go, look over there. Reactive propaganda, as always. How they ever were successful with this kind of clumsy, half thought through reactive propaganda? I mean, because they yelled that you were racist. That's it. Now it's not working. The point is that this is ridiculous. The Russian bots are working on social media to influence. But it's what we're seeing is very clear. They're just using the thing they're doing and lobbing it at whoever's against them. That's not to say that Russia and anybody else aren't also doing some element of this, but the obvious mobilized effort that we're seeing on places like Twitter are coming from exactly who we're talking about. Here's an Al Jazeera article. Are you chatting with a pro-Israeli AI-powered superbot? Smart bots have emerged as an unexpected weapon in Israel's war on Gaza. I mean, this is very coordinated. Now, we're going to come back to this one in general. I've only got about 10 minutes left, but I wanted to make sure we went through this at least to some degree. Well, this is important. So think about all this together. And we're going to obviously touch on this more as we go into closer to the election as well. But just as this develops, the technocratic direction is exploding right now. Right now, we're seeing all of this, whether it's aimed at all countries, anybody calling out what Israel's doing, which seems to be most of the world right now, because they've lost control of this, that now they're lashing out, aggressively going after anybody, even people in their media, people in government positions, anybody that barely goes afoul in the power structure is getting the incredible action. But even average individual people are getting targeted with this online and things like this on the streets of the UK. Here's Lord Bebo just pointing out the narrative. That happens all over the internet. People that are on certain political sides who just kind of give you what the narrative is. In England, armed crowds of migrants and their kids took to the streets with machetes and axes, and it's just the whole, immigration bad because they're not like us kind of game, which just, the reality is always a little bit more complex. And we have to recognize, for those that have been seeing this, that Israel has been driving this agenda for a very long time. It's not a secret. And I'll play you a video that shows more than one rabbi openly talking about how this needs to happen. The flooding of these people through Western countries to bring on the end time prophecies. Now, if you don't think there's some level of them actually believing this, well, they're literally genetically manufacturing a red heifer. Like, they believe this at some level. And so on top of that, the U.S. government is being used by Israel in the very war on the Middle East. Here's another one from Khaleesi. Look at these thugs in the streets of England last night causing property damage. Yeah, totally. The only difference, though, is they're not just, as she writes, this. I'll just read her tweet before I jump to the end. They're causing property damage, burning buildings, and attacking police. She says they're zero respect for institutions of the rule of law. Then she adds, because she sees the problem, they're not immigrants. They're the far right of Britain. They don't belong here. Oh, that's an interesting difference. So we're getting a lot of this from the people on the right of the conversation saying it's because of immigration, failing to highlight the group that seems to be driving that either way. But she's highlighting the fact that this is being driven from the right on the ground, which doesn't make sense, does it? Isn't it the opposite? Aren't they the ones pointing at the problem? No. This is fifth generation warfare. We're watching it's like let's just take the Israel-Palestine conversation, right? It's like a Zionist entity dressing up like a Palestinian and then acting out in violence and saying, look what they're doing. That's what this is. Not to say everywhere all the time, but we're watching the outlines of this. I think it's very clear. Robin Minotti points out, Lord calls for protest lockdowns in England. Okay, so now we've got calls for facial recognition. Now they're even bringing back lockdowns. So all the people out there that were pushing back on this during the COVID-19 illusion, people on the right who are now weirdly supporting the same thing because that's against immigration. You see how easy that is to play you into the same problem? Lord Walney calls for a COVID-style response to protesting across England. In November 2023, Woodcock advocated giving police the power to ban just pro-Palestinian protests. He said he would be updating his review to include, quote, looking at the threshold for police to ban a march. In May 2024, it was revealed that Woodcock would recommend banning groups like Palestinian Action, which is completely ridiculous and unconstitutional, or whatever the same equivalent, I think it's the same term in the UK. The bottom line, this is a problem reaction solution scenario. And then when you realize that they are very clearly driving this, it's easy to see. Nick Fuentes points this out. It's clear that not only are these protests being amplified and directed by Zionist plants and social media, but the mayhem will also catalyze a major crackdown on speech and persecution of the political right in the UK. Exactly. Now, as always, people want to make, the point is, no matter who says a thing, if something's correct, it's worth pointing out. And it's exactly right that you see the people within the right who are manipulating, creating the very thing that will hurt the right. All of this, he says, all of this with a labor supermajority government. Here is just another example of a person on the right in this country saying we can prove that Israel controls our Congress, and that means Israel's coordinating the weaponized mass migration. Just realize this is not a unique opinion. Here, Max Blumenthal points this out from a Times of Israel article. Why are U.S. pro-Israel groups boosting a far-right anti-Muslim UK extremist? That's a good question. Well, it's pretty simple if you just think of what we just talked about. U.S. pro-Israel groups boosting a far-right anti-Muslim extremist. It says the fascist British thug who incited pogroms against the UK, Tommy Robinson, is heavily dependent on the U.S. Israel lobby for publicity and support. Megatron says the man responsible for the civil unrest in the UK is Zionist Tommy Robinson. Now, these are other opinions, obviously, but I agree with the general overlap, and it's more than just one thing. But this, I agree with most of this. He says is a Mossad agent, even though the killing of the children was carried out by a person who is not a Muslim nor an illegal immigrant, but a native of the UK of Rwandan origin. Or yet it gets framed as exactly how it works for the agenda. People in the U.S. who blindly follow these narratives without even looking into them because it aligns with their political agenda will just scream the narrative, bad immigrants doing whatever we think they're doing. Even though the killing, it says Tommy Robinson, who is deeply infiltrated among the conservative population at UK and constantly spreads pro-Israel ideology, used the moment of bitterness to turn the anti-immigrant protest into racist and anti-Islamic ones with the help of social networks. Tommy Robinson constantly travels and resides in Tel Aviv. After Israel filled the UK with illegal immigrants with their wars in the Middle East and North Africa, now they will also cause a civil war. In addition to Robinson, the government of Britain, which is completely Zionist, constantly lets new illegal immigrants into the country, and it doesn't want to stop them. And this is all organized and coordinated. Now, ask yourself, I don't think it's as simple as that. There's more to it, but I agree with this. And overall, ask yourself, does that then make it their fault? Is it the fault of the immigrant that's allowed to do this? It's the fault of the people using them. Remember where your frustration and anger should be aimed at. Just like the people or the caravans from Venezuela in 2016 and forward, that was, Bolton and Elliot Abrams have publicly admitted that they caused that. But yet then later we point at it and say, see, it's communism and socialism causing it. They caused it themselves, whether or not you think that's the case, whether or not that is the case. They drove this into reality, used it to manipulate you into, at this point, falling right back into digital IDs and biometric scans. This we need to be aware of. Whether it's Asian provocateurs or fifth-generation warfare, you got people who are acting as if they're fighting on your side, but the very things they're driving into reality are used to put you in a place where you're losing your rights. Richard Medhurst says, is that you in the IDF shirt, Tommy Robinson? Yes, it is. What are you doing illegally in occupied Palestine? You call yourself a patriot, but wear a t-shirt of foreign army responsible for the deadliest terror attack against Britain's subjects. If it looks, talks, and self-victimizes like a Zionist, recognize what's going on, guys. I think it's very transparent. Now here, Adam Green posted a clip of rabbis explaining to you why Israel might want to achieve this.
You're going to need the iron of Esav, which represents Edom, which is the West, Europe, and the Americas, to get intermixed with Ishmael, which is basically Arabs and Muslims. How in the world was this ever going to happen if not for this refugee crisis? At the end of days, you're going to have this intermixing between Esav, Edom, which is the West, and the East, which is the Muslims and the Arabs, making this through this influx into the world. They're going to have a far larger birth rate than the indigenous people there, and they're going to sort of conquer by number. And there are many different sources for this, where there will be many, many people killed and so on and so forth. So the idea of having these refugees come into Europe, it's no longer a matter of whether it's right or wrong. It's just simply a fulfillment of what it was meant to be all along. This is the fulfillment of the Hazal and the prophecies. This has to happen, and this is just another sign that we are nearing, the completion of this tikkun of the entire world.
But we know one thing, right? That when it comes to the classic Rome, which is Europe, they're finished.
And you don't have to be a prophet or a great analysis for that. You have to open the TV or the internet and see that exactly what was prophesied then, that the sons of Ishmael are going to go and cause havoc around the world. So France is completely barbecued. England is next. Now half of Europe is completely half dead. Now look what's going on in America. So, now in a country near you.
Asking what's going to be with the Goyim when Mashiach comes. Will they be destroyed and annihilated? Someone asked, who cares? Okay. As a nation, they'll cease to exist, even as individuals. Every individual, no survivors. Not only as a nation they'll cease to exist, even as individuals. In modern terminology, they call it cultural genocide. They'll be annihilated. They basically learn there's going to be cultural genocide. That, you know what, the goyim as they exist as goyim, b'fnei atzmam, that's done with. Batul u'mavutul.
Well, to end on this, guys, the point being, just because they're saying that does not therefore mean that everybody in Israel thinks that, or every Jew thinks that, but realize there is a very clear thread. And then ask yourself whether this is driving something that's happening. Right. And again, make sure you hear on this that the conversation is not meant to imply that immigrants are bad and that's why they're being used this way. The point is that this is how they're perceiving this, manipulating people's lives from a very racist perspective and using them to manipulate other countries. And this is putting people in a place of desperation in order to drive them into other countries to, at everybody's expense. And this is definitely part of what's happening. But overall, realize how this is something much larger than one incident, one episode. You're being manipulated through whatever you want to call it. 5th generation warfare, psychological operations, digital regime change, destabilization, actively being driven by these oligarchs who are acting in exactly the ways that they told us this would go. I mean, they're pointing at us, by the way, saying that you're going to spread misinformation, you're going to do this, and then put someone like Elon in place that literally walks you like Pied Pipers people right into that direction. And that's not in any way to say that anybody should be censored, but it shows you that they're manufacturing exactly what they want to achieve. And just don't fall for it. Push back. See through the paradigm. And I'm going to leave you there if I got to race off and join something else, guys. But my plan is to do a show tomorrow. And really just every day if I can. It's my goal right now, as much as it's not happening. But thank you for tuning in, guys. Thank you for your support. There's so much going on. I know you see it. I know that you feel it. Help people see this. Have these conversations with people. Break these pieces down. Use the clips. Make clips of your own. Tag me. I'll share it. Make sure that you have conversations about this stuff. Make sure that you're dissecting it. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anybody's word for it. Come to your conclusions about what you see going on, looking at everything and filtering it down to what makes the most sense. Thank you for tuning in. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.